We call this the second premarital counseling video. What it's really about, though, is the solid foundation principles for a really wonderful marriage, a passionate marriage, a fun-filled, exciting, lifelong marriage. Dr. Matt, your relationship fitness coach, I'm here to tell you that if you have a governing purpose for your marriage and you're a whole individual with your very own personal purpose as well, and you marry your purpose together with another person's purpose and you create this sense of oneness towards a common set of goals, a common set of shared vision. Inside of that, you can get your needs met. Now, everyone has a needs list. We talk a little bit about that in this video. Check it out. Let me know in the comments. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Give a listen to this, and we've got several other ones already available and some more on the way. Thank you so much.
Good morning. This is Dr. Matt Eschler coming to you live for some premarital counseling. We did session number 1 a little while ago, and on session 1 we talked about some things that I want to recap. If you go back all the way to the very first thing that we want to do as a married couple. Now, those of you that are listening that are already married, this is just really good information that you can literally use this to make your marriage better. If you're going into a marriage, if you're engaged or if you're dating someone really seriously, you might want to use this information to step up the game a little bit so that you can have a bliss-filled, peace-filled, joy-filled, happy marriage. We talked about coming into a marriage in our first session as a whole person. And if you think through that lens of a whole person as someone that has all of their character traits, they understand them, it doesn't mean they're a finished product. It means they're going to grow and they're going to get better and better as time goes on. But the idea is to be a whole person, have all of your character traits identified, have things that you admire about other people on the table so that you can become a better person, that you can grow. You know what your needs are to be happy. And so in order to do that, you have to have your very own governing purpose. So think about that for a moment. During the last week or two, in between these 2 sessions that we've done for premarital counseling, do you have an individual governing purpose? I want you to think about that for a moment. It's your North Star. It's the thing that you're reaching for all the time. It is that thing that you use to make good decisions. So if part of my governing purpose is to be a person of integrity and to manage my income wisely, and that might be just a small portion of my entire governing purpose. But if I was in a group of friends that decided to rob a bank, I might say, my governing purpose for my life is to be an honest person and to manage my own income, not to steal other people's. And so I would say no to that. You see how a governing purpose helps you make decisions. It helps you decide what is okay and what's not okay. And when you're going into a marriage, you're joining with another person from a completely different culture than yours. But the idea behind diversity is owning the fact that you and the person you're going to marry are diverse. You are coming from completely different cultures, backgrounds, places. And so the two of you will have these governing purposes that if you are solid and so is your lover, then as you make decisions, you'll make decisions that are good for both of you. Like if my wife wanted to rob banks and I want to have honesty and integrity, then her and I would have to negotiate not robbing banks. Now, what do we do if her initial individual governing purpose was to take money from the rich and give to the poor? And so robbing banks was a way of she would only take from rich people's bank accounts. It's a terrible analogy. But the idea behind robbing the rich to give to the poor might be noble, but it still lacks integrity. I hear half of you talking about our government. This is not a political show. Point is that her and I would have to figure out a way to amass wealth in an integritous way and then pass it on to people that are less fortunate. And so you see my point. We would negotiate a way for her and I to both get our needs met, but we would both have to have some kind of loyalty to a personal governing purpose. That way you both show up to the relationship. Which brings us to our last session. We spoke about a marital governing purpose, and the assignment was for you that are engaged, or you that are just interested in starting fresh in your marriage, to create a marital governing purpose that was a combination of the two individual purposes into one governing purpose for the marriage. And if you can imagine a family system that has everyone as their own individual governing purpose, they all know who they are. They've all been trained and taught that they have agency and freedom, and they can choose their own lifestyle and purpose. And then they pull together with a family governing purpose through the marriage of their parents, and that becomes a powerful force for good. A family that has a lot of personalities that are all pulled into a hyper focus into a direction. And it's you parents, you married couples that lead the path. You lead the charge on this. And then we talked about having needs to be happy. Now, once you have your marital governing purpose, you talk with each other, and this is what session 2 is about. You talk with each other. You talk nonstop, and everyone is on different levels of communication. Everyone communicates healthy in some ways and unhealthy in other ways. And our show today is on pulling together some good, healthy communication. And so one of the very first assignments I gave in that first session of premarital counseling is to list your top 5 or 10 needs with each other and ask questions of each other so that you understand the other person's top needs to be happy. Now, that doesn't mean you automatically run out and meet all of those needs. It just means you're aware of what they are. It means that you're aware enough that you can be a kind person and with compassion and do what you can to meet those needs. It's up to me to be happy in my marriage. It's up to me to be happy in my career. It's up to me to be happy in my relationships with peers. But it is really nice when you have a partner, a person that you're connected to through marriage. It's a person that you're connected to that is heavily interested in meeting your needs. And it's also great service for you to know your lover's needs and to meet them as well. Does that make sense? And so that was session 1 of premarital counseling. And the assignments that you were given was to sit down with the person that you're going to marry. And if you're a married couple wanting to get a little bit healthier, your assignment was to sit down with your spouse and ask them what their top 10 needs to be happy were, and ask them to define each of them. Like, what does it mean to them? Because honestly, the need for companionship or the need for physical intimacy or the need for communication looks very different for every individual. That's why I say we're very diverse people that are marrying each other. You're not marrying a clone of yourself. And a lot of times we get caught up in thinking that, oh, she wants intimacy. Well, I know what that means. And then you find out, like I did early on in a marriage, that it doesn't mean the same thing. I thought intimacy in part was slapping her on the butt when she walked by me, and it turns out she doesn't like that. And so the idea of finding out what is intimate or what is required for communication or what is companionship and those top needs might be defined very different. There's thousands and thousands of options and even probably infinite options for getting needs met. And so the idea of a couple exploring the processes of getting their needs met is a romantic process. And so that's what we're doing in session 1. Session 2 is right now. Dr. Matt Eschler with Integrated Counseling and Wellness. You can give us a call for live sessions of premarital counseling and for marathon sessions for couples that are struggling. Live sessions of premarital counseling are there's 5 sessions, and we cover everything from nuts, soup to nuts. We cover everything. And the idea behind covering everything is it gives you a head start in your marriage with some things that through research and through my personal experience over the course of many, many years of working with marriages, it will help you smooth out any potential rough edges that seem to happen early on in marriages. So session 2, communication. Communication is literally the art form of expressing your needs. See, what a lot of couples do early on and forever is assume that they know each other. Assume that they know each other so well that they don't need to communicate anymore. They don't need to express their needs anymore. And there's a lot of people that'll say things like, I'm expected to read her mind, or he thinks I know what he's thinking without him even saying it. And then there's also the more mischievous side. I don't need to talk to him. I already know what he's thinking, or I already know what she's going to do with that. I already know that she's this way or that way, or that he's this way or that way. And once a couple decides they already know the other person so well, and I'm telling you, you newlyweds, or you young ones that are just heading into a marriage right now, there's a married couple out there with one partner saying, oh, it's true. I know exactly what he's going to say to that, or I know exactly how he's going to feel about that, or I know exactly what she's going to say to that, so I'm just not going to tell her. There's a couple out there that is slowly ruining their marriage by assuming they know the other one. What that does, it stops the other person from growing in your mind. It stops maturation. It stops personal growth. It stops change. It doesn't allow for an atoning sacrifice to happen for people to actually work through a change. And what we're talking about with the ability to change is if I don't assume that I know my wife so well that I don't need to check in with her, then I check in with her. And there's a couple out there that is slowly ruining their marriage by not checking in, by just saying, I already know what she's going to think, or I already know what he's going to say, so I'm not even going to ask, or I already know what he's thinking and I already know he's mad at me. And so they get mad and defensive back. Well, what happens if this one time he's not mad at you? What happens if through some personal growth and through some, maybe even some counseling, change has happened? You young people heading into a marriage, I want to tell you right now, out there, is somebody saying, oh, he'll never grow. He'll never change. He's been that way for 30 years. He thinks he's right. He thinks he's right about everything. See, the problem is when we lock somebody into what we know about them, and then we start judging them based upon that, and even treating them based upon our assumptions, we start ruining the relationship. Now, the person might act out just the way you assumed, but you ought never lock someone in. So part of communication is, as a newlywed couple, as a couple heading into a marriage, is committing to never lock someone into your assumptions. Always check in. Hey, are you still feeling this way? Hey, are you still mad at me? Or are you mad at me? Hey, I've been thinking this. Does that upset you? Or does that make you happy? Does that make you sad? Does that make you scared and fear or mad? What does it do? What does it generate for you? So expressing needs, asking each other's questions is what this session's all about. Part of expressing needs early on in a marriage and then throughout your marriage as a habit is super important, because couples start to evolve into forgetting in certain ways that they have needs. So, and I want to just be a little bit gender specific here, and it's not super popular. I'll just tell you that right now. It's not super popular. And I get that there's like a gray area here of research truth, but it does seem to be that women neglect their needs more than men. What I notice a lot is women, especially in a family setting where a young couple gets married and they're pretty good at expressing their needs, and they love each other, and they're all kind of into the first year or two of marriage, and then kids come along and they find this great joy in kids, and you guys that are heading into a marriage, you've got this all to look forward to. It's a wonderful experience, and you'll have a lifetime worth of juicy, fun experiences and romantic times and hard times and great times with family members and kids as you start having kids. But one thing that can happen that can tear a marriage apart, that I want all of you young couples that are heading towards marriage to remember, that as kids come into the program, men tend to look through the lens of providing. And again, this is a little bit gender specific hardwiring, but there's a lot of latitude for females, men and women to both feel the same way. And women go into the maybe a little bit of hardwiring of this nurturing model of, I'm going to take care of these children's basic needs. And it's sometimes a little bit counterintuitive for a man to think of, oh, you mean you get up every 2 hours because the baby's crying? Why do you do that? So we have to talk with each other about what needs need to be met when we start having kids. And a lot of moms, it seems, just give their needs up, and a lot of men kind of put their head down and go to work, and a lot of men and women work way too many hours. And next thing you know, the top need that a mom gets is being able to go potty all by herself without a little kid with her. And the next need a man gets, Matt it thought about, is like, how do I make enough money to pay for all this, and what kind of a job do I want next? And so again, a little bit of gender role specificity there, but you want to really watch out for each other. You men want to make sure that your spouses are cognizant of their needs, and that they express them, and that they get their needs met. And you women want to make sure that your men are given opportunities to nurture and to grow with the family. And part of that companionship necessity of getting married and having children is working with your individual strengths in this whole process. So if my strength is service, my spouse ought to really help me do self-care. And if another person's strength is self-care, their spouse ought to really help them with performing acts of service for others. And so that way self-care doesn't turn into selfish, and that way really a service doesn't turn into a neglecting of self to the point of not ever doing self-care. And that's just in a nutshell. So we come back to this idea of communication from the very start of an engagement for the premarital counseling world. From the very start of the engagement, don't just run an agenda. Don't just date and have fun. Sit with each other once a week and have some of the conversations about what are your needs to be happy. Sit with each other with each week and remember that each one of you use words differently. Like, I might use the word, I would really love to be more intimate. And there's a lot of connotations of the word intimate. There's non-sexual intimacy, there's romantic intimacy, there's physically sexual intimacy. And so there's a myriad there's millions of different brands of intimacy. So if my wife says to me, like, I would like to have more intimacy in our relationship, and I do a little cartwheel because I think we're going to, break out the hot oils and candles and go to bed that night. And what she really wanted to do is put her legs over my lap and watch a movie. You see how that would be very different. And what if I wanted to just like blow off the movie and get straight to the bedroom? And what if she feels all disappointed that I didn't hear her? So she's not really expressive and into the intimate experience in the bedroom. And so can you see how, if I don't really understand how she uses the word intimate, if I don't ask a question or two, and if we don't have a chat, and remember, this feels like to some of you conflict. It's really not conflict. It's seeking to understand. And so part of this communication in session 2 of premarital counseling I want to talk about is when you express needs and express wants and express desires to each other, when you talk about schedules and your different activities for the week, when you're discussing the future of your marriage, all of the language, all of the words, we call it neurolinguistics in the counseling world, all of those neurolinguistics that are being used to convey meaning have to be explored with each other. Now, we can get to know each other well enough to know what direction our lover goes when they use certain words. Like, my wife can get to the place where she knows when she says intimate time, I automatically jump to physical. And I can know that when she says intimate time, she automatically jumps to non-sexual intimacy. And we can then get along. We can then really warm each other up and be there for each other because we just know the order of things. We know that we would watch a movie with her legs draped over my legs first. And we'd talk and have fun and communicate about the movie, and it'd be romantic. And then we would retire to other activities perhaps later. And that's the idea behind expressing needs and understanding how we use words so different. So that adage way back in the Covey days, and I guess it's probably not Covey that should be credited for this, but it's a psalmist somewhere that said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Now imagine a young couple or an old couple, you guys going into your marriages. If you dedicate yourself, trusting that your spouse or future spouse is as well, dedicating his or herself to understanding you first and then being understood. So we're doubling down on the I'm going to understand what you mean, and I'm going to help you understand what I mean. Can you see where that can really help the future of your relationship? Now, we talked about neurolinguistics and how couples use words differently. Okay, I want you to take that serious. That's a pretty serious thing that happens to get in the way of a lot of relationships. Part 2 of communication is patterns, the different patterns of how people look at communication. I'm going to use my wife and I as an example, and I want you guys to just think about your relationship and your experiences in your relationship. And there's probably more than these 2 ways if you break each of these 2 ways down. I'm going to keep it really simple, that there are 2 ways of preparing for conversation. Some people prepare a conversation in their head, and then they bring it down into their heart and share it with some emotion. And those are the people like my wife. She'll think through things and make some really clear decisions of what feels right. And so she'll be thinking and feeling all of this stuff, and then she'll bring it to me. Okay? Now, in her world, that makes sense because she generally says things right the first time. She generally gets things out in a way that feels right to her, that she's comfortable with. She doesn't have to repair very much. She sometimes will change her mind. But once she puts it out there, it's put out there with the proper level of emotion, with the proper level of intensity, and she likely has thought through the neurolinguistics and has used the correct terminologies and really has some follow-up comments to make so that I really understand. All right, so there's that form of communication. You think through it, and then you say it. Now, the rest of the world, that's half the world. The other half of the world is like me. I blurt stuff out. I just start talking out loud. And as I talk, I literally listen to how I'm sounding, and I start repairing as I go. Like, oh, that didn't sound good. Let me just change it to this. And, oh, that didn't sound good. And so I'm very different in my communication patterns as my wife is. And again, this is just 2 broad terms. There's a lot of in between, but so when she's thinking through what she wants to say, I'm like sometimes looking at my watch, tapping. I'm going, "What, are you going to say anything?" And it's not really horribly a long time, but sometimes I'll say, well, "Wow, when did you come up with all that?" And she goes, "Well, I've been thinking about it for a few days." And I start to feel hurt that you were thinking about this for like 2 days and you finally brought it to me. And she goes, "Well, yeah, I wanted to make sure that I was thinking right." And I'm thinking, I'm sad at times because I want to be involved in that whole process. And it doesn't make sense to her that I want to be involved in that whole process because she says, "Well, that would be a waste of time." And then I'm thinking, well, why would it be a waste of time if I wandered through the whole process with you? And she goes, "Well, because I think things that I decide aren't right. And then I finally get to what I believe is right. And that's what I share with you. So you don't have to waste all that time." So you see where she's coming from with that. She believes she's right, and she is. That's how she processes. She would be very uncomfortable to just start talking and then repair as she goes. And it's also hard for her to understand people that do speak as they think through things. It like that thinking out loud. And so imagine I'm feeling hurt. And now we're going to repair all this before I'm done because she's thought about something for a couple of days, got it all prepared in her mind and knows how to feel about it and then shares it with me. In her mind, she did me a huge service by working it all out in her head first. I'm feeling like she doesn't love me enough to let me be involved in that process. She's believing that she loves me so much that she doesn't want me to hurt for even a minute if she's not going to really believe what that portion anyway. So she does that all internally. All right. So that's a person that prepares communication internally. And people like me feel sad about that. And so we have to find this bridge to get through. Now, I'm just the opposite, right? I'll start talking and I'll start saying things. And then I'll hear that no, that doesn't sound right. And so I'll change my mind and I'll say it a little different. Halfway through the conversation, my wife is often looking at me like, I don't know what to believe. Like, were you just lying a minute ago when you said that you wanted to go to Florida, and then now all of a sudden you say you want to go to Costa Rica, and then now you're saying that because of COVID and some of the restrictions, let's just do some national parks in Washington County. I don't know which I'm preparing for. I go, well, prepare for the last thing that I said, not the two that I repaired. So can you see how she thinks I should process that all in my head like she does? I think she should say everything so that by the end I've watched her do the whole process, maybe even helped a little bit. And so we can really be at odds with each other because she feels confused and maybe even like I lied to her at the beginning. And what I'm telling her is, no, I process out loud. And there's a lot of people like me. There's a lot of people, a lot of you that are listening, talk your way through a problem. And you have to hear it out loud. For some reason, for me to just think through it in my mind, I never hear how it sounds outside of me. And so I have to say it. And so I'll speak for like 15 minutes. And by the end of the 15 minutes, my wife would say 2 hours or 3 days. I think 15 minutes. By the end of that, I've repaired what doesn't sound right, and I get to the conclusion. So I get to the conclusion out loud, and I like her being involved in all of that because I like to look at her facial expressions. I like to hear how it sounds through her eyes. I like all of that. So early on in the marriage, she was confused as to why would I say it if I didn't mean it? And I was confused at her because I would wonder, well, why doesn't she include me in all of it? She thought she was doing me a favor. She thought she was being a good lover by processing internally and then only saying what she meant. And I thought I was doing her a favor by including her in all the ramblings, getting me to the final truth that I wanted to speak, my truth. And so can you see how those different communication patterns, if not negotiated, could make people feel crazy with each other? I can tell you the first couple of years of our marriage, before we really realized, in fact, it was a wise person that said, Chris, Matt processes out loud. And Chris processes internally. Like, she thinks she's doing it because she loves you. And Chris, he does that because he wants you involved in his life, and he thinks that's a loving thing to do. So can you see how both of us could feel very misunderstood if we're not super careful? And that's what was happening at the first of our marriage. And I want to tell you all, as you're in this premarital counseling session, or as you're an old married couple, some of the communication pattern is going to get in the way if you don't understand each other. So all we had to do is what Chris did, and she did it willingly, is she would get some of the big decisions, like no, I don't want to rob a bank. No, I don't want to spend $1 billion. I want to save and budget. And then she'd come and talk with me through the fine tuning of her opinions. And what I would do is I would start with, I haven't thought real clear about this. I want to hear how it's. I'd give her some kind of a heads up. I just want to talk through this. And by the time we're done, we'll know where we're at. That way she can just dismiss things automatically, kind of like she would do internally, that I say that I change as I talk. And so now we have fun conversations. It's where I can like just kind of fantasize and get the words out of my mouth. I can repair as I go. And as I say, oh, nope, that's not right. This is what I really meant. She'll automatically let go. Now, remember, those people that talk out loud will have an incredibly difficult time not doing that. So if you're a spouse that wants your partner to just be quiet until he knows what he's thinking or she's thinking, you're going to ruin parts of your relationship because your spouse is going to have to go somewhere else to verbalize things to get clear on, because I'm a person that literally has to say it out loud before I know it's true for me. I don't just think quietly in my head. I think much of the reason for that is there's too many voices in my head. I've got this attention deficit anxiety stuff that I've got a lot of thoughts in my head. And if I don't slow it down and put words to it and get it out of my mouth, I don't really form full thoughts all the time. I form a lot of pictures, go in a lot of crazy directions. And so if my wife was such that she said, no, I don't want to do that. It's too confusing, too heart-wrenching. I never quite know where I stand until you're done. I would just have to go find a friend to verbalize things to. And wouldn't it be a shame if that friend couldn't be my lover? Now, what if I needed her to process out loud? And what if that made her incredibly nervous because she didn't like to say things unless she was committed? You see, we can't force the other one to be just like us. You can't force your future bride to be just like you or your future groom to be just like you. So here's the rule. The rule is know each other's form of communication, know how you operate, and then mold together in something that works for both of you. So we've talked about expressing ourselves and literally defining the language that we're going to use, define what intimacy means, or define what, if I say I need to get to work, my wife might, just start sending me out the door, go to work. And I say, oh, no, I mean, I need to get to work next Monday. Monday I've got a lot to do. Sure glad I've got a weekend to relax. See, we need to ask each other questions and not just make assumptions that we know. So that's the first step. Second step is understand our different patterns. Understand, do you process internally or are you an external processor? Do you process by hearing yourself say things, or do you process everything in your head and your heart and then put it out there correctly the first time? Once you know who you are, you can explain yourself to your spouse and negotiate a pattern together. And that's super, super healthy. So does that make sense so far? Your first assignment as a couple is to find out how your lover processes. Are they an internal, or do they like to hear themselves say things and then repair it along the way? Remember, if you're a processor externally, people that are internal processors, as you say things, they lock in thinking you must mean it. So you need to tell them, no, I'm going to say a lot of things and then fix it as I hear how it sounds and looks through your eyes. And so if they know that, then they know that they're not in trouble the first thing you say that's completely out in left field. And so you also need to talk through how you're going to get clear on that. At what point, like my wife and I's agreement is, as soon as we say, okay, this is our commitment, or this is where I'm at with it, then she knows I've came to a conclusion. Until then, it's like wet cement that's getting formed into something that can harden. So do you remember we spoke at the very beginning about seeking to understand? Once we know that we all use words different and that we all process information differently, now we need to learn how to be good listeners. Now, I'm going to just give you one big rule. And this is something that most old married people completely forget. And I want to just highlight it because I got to tell you, I'm a marriage counselor by trade. I'm a forensic psychologist that works with high conflict marriages. And by the way, Dr. Matt Eschler is my name. If you need to get a hold of me, 435-688-1111. I have a front desk team that will field questions and help you get with some proper counselors to help you. And I've got a whole bunch of trained counselors that are just super incredible at our office at Integrated Counseling and Wellness. And what they work a lot with, and what we get together in our clinical meetings and discuss cases, one of the things that people forget to do after the engagement kind of wears off. And believe me, I'm not the guy that believes the honeymoon ever has to end. I think the honeymoon can go forever. But if the honeymoon's going to end and it's going to get rough, one of the very first problems is people listen to respond instead of listen to understand. So I want that to sink in for a minute. One of the biggest dilemmas that I see in the marriage world, one of the biggest reasons people come to me in high conflict marriage is they do not listen to understand the person that's talking. It looks a little bit like this. My wife says, hey, I need to talk with you. I need to talk about that trip you want to take. And so I automatically start thinking, oh no, does she want to cancel the trip? Does she want me to not go? Does she want to? So I start building my defense. And she starts talking about the trip, and I'm taking in little bits of what she says so that I can debate. I can refute it. So what I'm listening to do is respond. I'm planning my response throughout her conversation. If I've prejudged what she's doing a little bit, even a little bit, sometimes we prejudge a lot, But if I even have an inkling of prejudgment and I'm listening to debate her points and make her wrong or make her change her mind about something I perceive she wants to do that I don't like, then I'm not listening to even understand her. I'm listening to respond. Can you see how that will get in the way? There's couples that come to my office that literally live to win the next fight. They think through this lens of, I've lost a couple of big conversations, lost a couple of fights, and so I'm going to win the next one no matter what. Even if I'm wrong, I'm going to win. And they live in this lateral love world, this, I won a few, I'm sure she's going to win a few, and we have this give and take through who lost the last fight. Those are icky marriages. Those are marriages that none of you want to be in. Does that make sense? So what you want to do is the exact opposite. Clear all of your assumptions. Clear all of your assumptions. Sometimes you might even want to put them out there. If you're like me, you got to say them like, ooh, I'm afraid you're going to try to cancel the trip, or I'm afraid you're going to say, do this, or want me to do that. And then my wife said, well, it's a little bit that, but I just want you to listen to me. And so now it's out there. Now clear your assumptions and listen to understand. There's a process for that I'm going to give you right now. So if you think through this lens, and I know this is a little bit clinical, and you're going to smooth it out for your relationship, but I want you to think about it as one of you is a speaker and one of you is a listener. The speaker is going to share thoughts and feelings, and the listener is going to listen and is going to like put little bookmarkers where there's questions. Now, some couples want questions asked throughout. Like at any point, if you don't quite understand me, ask me a question. I'm like that. My wife, on the other hand, is she would like to get it all out and then me go back and ask her some questions. And so if it's a big deal, I might bring a little notebook and jot down my questions as she's going. I might just put little cues that I had a question about and really listen to understand. Okay? So the speaker speaks. Now, one important thing for you that are the speaker, you want to share thoughts with thoughts and feelings with feelings. Corny as it sounds, I feel like going to Walmart. Going to Walmart's not a feeling. I feel hungry, so I want to go to Walmart. That changes everything. So if my wife says, I feel like I want to go to Walmart and I don't want to go, I'm thinking, well, I want to go. But if she says, I feel hungry and I like that rotisserie chicken Walmart sells and I would love to go get some, I want to do that all day long. Even if I don't want to go to Walmart, if she's got a craving for a food, I understand food cravings. I'm a big guy. And so I'm on my way. But see, if she didn't share the feeling appropriately in there, then I wouldn't understand her. And so if you could work on, so many of us either share thoughts in the form of feelings or we share feelings in the form of thoughts. And so keep them clear. If you say, I think, give the think. If you say, I feel, give the real feeling. I feel happy, sad, scared, or mad about X. Or when we talk only about going on big trips, I get scared that our budget's not going to be very healthy going into retirement. And so, see, when you share feelings, it de-escalates the argument. So the listener, you can help the speaker, you can help the listener have empathy for you if you share your feelings throughout the process. So this listening to understand, we got a speaker and we got a listener. The speaker is going to share thoughts and feelings about the topic, and the listener is going to listen to understand. Now, listener, your job is to summarize what you've heard and ask if you're right. So I might say to my wife, so what I hear you saying is you love to travel, you'd love to go to Costa Rica, but you're worried, you have some fear about our budget going into retirement. And she'll say, yeah, you understand me. Or she'll say, no, you need to add this piece in. You didn't hear this piece. So you listen and then you summarize and then you allow them to correct you if you're wrong. So if I say, so what you're saying is you're scared about money and you don't want to travel with me. And she would say, no, that's not what I said at all. I said, I'd love to travel with you. And I'm just worried about retirement. We're getting old. And so I would love to travel with you. I'd love to spend all our money on trips with you. So if I hang on to, you just don't want to travel, you just want to be a fun sucker and not have any fun. If I hang on to that belief and I don't ask a question, let them clarify and believe them, and you newlyweds or young people that are listening to this, or you people going into a marriage, let me tell you right now, listening, there's an old married couple out there right now that's hearing this, that's saying, but I know how they already feel. I already understand him. I don't need to ask for clarity. When she says this, I know exactly what it means. See, that's what we don't want to get caught doing. We don't want to build these assumptions and then lock people into them. We want to give people the chance to change and grow. So the listener's job is to listen, summarize, and then when you listen, to not correct them, when you listen without judgment, when you restate what they said, you restate what you heard, you do that until the speaker says, "You understand me." Now we almost literally pass a baton. We pass the baton over to the listener, and the listener gets to share their view. Now the listener becomes the speaker, and the speaker at the beginning becomes a listener, and you do the same thing. And so I share back some of my thoughts. Let's say we're talking about travel and budget. I share some of my thoughts about retirement and budgeting and how we can do both. And my wife, as the listener, is not listening to respond. She's not listening to debate. She's not listening to see where I agree or disagree with her. None of that. When you're listening to someone, what I want you to do is listen to understand. I got paid the highest compliment. I've got a couple of friends out there that one of them is a client of mine that is such a good listener. Like when I say something to this particular friend, he kind of actually leans in a little bit, and I can just tell that he wants to understand me, and it feels really good. And I've known this guy for many years, and I've emulated that. And the other day for Father's Day, my one son, we're all on a Zoom call with each other. My one son, all right, let's all say something nice about Dad. And I'm thinking, oh, this is painful, because I'm thinking, I don't know if they want to do that. And it's like, I don't know, it feels vulnerable to me. And so I get a little bit weird about it. But anyway, three of the one spouse and two kids said, when I talk with Dad, I feel really listened to. And I'm telling you, that made me cry, like a little bit outside and inside. That was probably the best compliment that I've ever been given. I'm totally speaking out loud and knowing that that's not true. I've been given lots of wonderful comments from my wife and from other people, and that was a wonderful compliment, though. Like, it made me feel like, oh my word, I'm a good listener, and that's I love that. And what I really loved is that 3 out of the 6 people that were all highlighted that as feeling super good, that they were really listened to. And so I want you to understand that when you listen to respond, people get the impression that you just want to get understood. When you listen to understand, people feel heard. And you will be able to negotiate much better, and you will be able to have more clarity, more love, more passion, more juicy fun and understanding in your relationships if your lover, your spouse, your future spouse really feels heard all the time. I think that's probably what I want to bookmark for you, as if you mess up on everything else, if you completely blow the rest of the relationship in many areas anyway, if you are a person that's willing to really listen and understand your lover, you're going to rescue the marriage, and it's going to be wildly, wildly fun. You're going to have an incredible marriage, an incredible situation. And the reason I want you to really listen to understand is when your partner feels understood, then they can, without defensiveness, negotiate an outcome that's good for both of you. Now imagine if both listener and speaker, if your goal is to be understood and to understand the other, you can't go wrong. If 2 people are trying to use the linguistics, the processes, and if they're willing to ask each other questions without assumptions, all the way to a closure, you'll make really good decisions together. You'll have really good outcomes together. And so I want to just share that that's probably a key. Now, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this, but I want to highlight two other things that cause pain. So number one, listen to respond causes pain. Listen to understand causes joy. So that's clear, right? The second thing that I want to warn you about just a little bit is your filters. In the clinical world, we have a thing called transference and countertransference. Transference is when I feel something and I'm in a place of knowing that you feel it too. So if I feel upset, then if I'm entering into this thing of transference and countertransference, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the assumption that you're upset too, and I'm going to put that on you because I feel it. You must feel it. It's narcissistic people do this professionally. That's what they do. Non-narcissistic people do this a lot just because they have such strong feelings that they assume everyone feels like they do, so they put it on the other person. Like if you go into a conversation and you really listen to understand, but you're only listening to understand confirmation bias. Like I'm only listening to you to understand where you agree with me, and I'm going to ignore everything else. That gets in the way. Funny, boy, the Facebook is crazy these days. There was all this controversy over removing the Dixie name from our. We've got an elderly lady that made some comments about Dixie and about her pride in Dixie and wanting to keep Dixie, and a person on Facebook actually said, "Oh, I wished that older generation would just die out already." Now, the woman that was pro Dixie was not really trying to understand and listen to those that wanted Dixie removed. But here's a person that wants Dixie removed that is in no way empathic or doesn't want to even try to listen to the opinion of a senior that's been here a long time that had some different points of view. And it seems that literally both of them were bigoted towards or prejudiced towards the other. And my fear is that there's so much of that there's so much of, if you don't confirm my bias, then you just are stupid. If you don't confirm my bias, then, and there's not a lot of, and funny thing is there's many, many, many people that say, I feel disenfranchised, I feel marginalized, I feel unlistened to, and I don't want to hear a thing that you're saying. Now, think about that. The very thing that got them marginalized was not having a voice, and so they want to take away the voice of the opposing side. And I really would hope that we could all just pause and listen to understand. And sometimes listening takes the form of knowing that a riot is a form of communication. And we can call it a tantrum if we want, but it literally is a form of communication. And if we look with love and really try to understand what a person's trying to communicate, whether they're rioting, whether they're yelling, whether they're talking softly, whether they have a smile or a frown, if we don't do this thing of transference of like, no, you've got to feel like I feel. If we really clear ourselves out of the way, we can, with love and compassion, we can listen to understand. And if we've got a rioter, if we've got a yeller, a screamer, if we've got a soft-spoken person, if we've got a person that uses just facial expressions, and we really lean in and listen, we will begin to come together and make decisions together that will work for everyone. That's the odd thing about these days. For me, is it appears that people believe that there's either one way or the other. There's my way or your way. There's this way or that way. When in a very literal sense, there's a million ways on every topic, mostly. I'd imagine there's a couple of things that I would say there's only one way, but really there's a million ways. There's a million ways for a couple. There's a million ways for a community. And there's a million ways for a nation and a world to move towards an agreement that everyone loves if we pause long enough to listen to the other. And so rather than when you sit down you're engaged and you're preparing for marriage and you're sitting with each other, rather than trying to make the other one be like you, How about you clear you out of the way and listen? You might listen for things that you don't quite understand and ask questions. So listening to understand can get us to this place of then solving problems. Yeah, that's probably where I'll leave it. So first rule, remember, if we go back, listen to understand, do not listen to respond. Don't engage in confirmation bias thinking where I've got this huge bias and I'm right and I'm only going to hear what makes me more right, or I'm going to just ignore you when you don't agree with me, or I'm going to be angry with you when you don't agree with me, or I'm going to wish that you were just aging out if you don't. See, we don't want to do that. So rule number 2 is get your transference out of the way, get your projected identity out of the way, and just be a blank slate and listen. So listen to understand and don't filter it through your own bias. Get your bias out of the way. And most of the time, to get a person's bias out of the way, all you have to do is acknowledge it. If I acknowledge, hey, I'm pro keep the Dixie on the mountain, or I'm pro sandblast Dixie off the mountain, if I get my bias out there, now I want to hear your point of view because perhaps I'm incorrect, or perhaps there's a better way to manage this. So I've put it out there, and then I've made a decision to set my bias aside. I'm honest with it. I have integrity, but now I really am willing to listen to you without bias because I want to understand you completely. The other thing for you young couples going into a marriage, and we're winding up this second session, and this last talking point is such a key. What I see come into the counseling office after a few years of marriage, and then into like the 2 different points of time that marriages end are about 7 years and about 19 years into marriage. And so one of the things that happens is the couple stop solving problems together. They just start fighting. If we maintain an individual governing purpose, we've got a strong sense of marital purpose, and we then start this process of bringing our whole selves into the relationship, and then we have these conversations, maybe even crucial conversations that are difficult. I want you to do this as you go into conversations. Keep it to one difficult topic at a time. I want you to hear that for a second. As you're maybe arguing a point, it is so easy to be triggered into other arguments. And I'll watch couples start to argue about date night. He'll say, you don't even want to go on date night. And she'll say, because I've coached them, do you want to ask me if that's true? And he'll say, do you want to go on date night? And she'll go, yes, I want to go on date night. I just feel like we need to keep within a budget. And then he'll say his thing about it. So we're talking about date night. Now we're talking about budgets. And then we might talk about who spent the most on a car. Now we'll talk about who bought a car the other one didn't want. And then at some point we're talking about which one of them blows too much money on the kids and which one of them is irresponsible. And really, at the beginning, all we wanted to talk about is, are we going to do date night? But now we've got 6 arguments. You spoiled the kids. You bought a car I didn't like. You never listened to me, and you're so worried about budget you don't have any fun. And no longer are we even talking about the original thing. And so I would challenge you that if all of those conversations need to happen, let's get them on the table. But let's pick one, maybe 2 for each setting. And I just want to give you a rough average to really do a great job in solving 2 problems. And I'm going to talk about the word solving. I probably misused that word. If we're going to really work through 2 problems to an agreement, it'll take you about an hour a problem. So you need a couple of hours for 2 solid. If you want to talk about date night and budgeting for date night specifically, you better plan on a couple of hours. Now, a lot of you out there says, oh my word, we've got 48 million difficult conversations. You want us to give 2 hours to each of them? Yeah, I actually do. Now, here's the rule, though. I want to put your mind at ease. If you really do come to agreements and solve a couple of problems a week, because I'm not for you negotiating these big things like budget and date night dilemmas. And I want you to do nightly check-ins with each other, nightly check-ins on how did we do. Maybe negotiate some tiny agreements through the week, but once a week, not on date night, once a week during what we call couples council. Remember that, the 3 meetings, family night, couples council, date night? Couples councils once a week. Some people do it with me. I help them do couples council. They come in to see me once a week, and we talk about hard things. You guys can do it without me. You can do it all alone at home. By the way, Dr. Matt Eschler is my name, Integrated Counseling and Wellness, 435-688-1111. Call and they'll get you with one of the team to assist you with any of this. But one of the things is keeping talking points clear and understandable and limited to 2. So each week, as I was saying, if you cover just a couple of things and you cover them with depth, make management-based agreements with each other, and then you go operate, a lot of the 48 million problems that you perceive that you have will resolve themselves as you go. That's just how it works. These problems kind of resolve themselves. And so you don't have to think, oh no, 2 hours times 48 million, that's too many hours. Each time you do a good job of negotiating an agreement without argument, but with complaining. I don't want you to argue with each other, but I do want you to complain to each other. And I want you to manage your complaints with each other. You're gonna like, every time you deal with a couple of problems well, a couple of complaints really in a good way, it knocks out millions of other problems. And so that's how it works. Okay? So, number 1, listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Number 2, know that you have a bias. And put your bias on the table and then get it out of the way when you're listening. And then number 3, when you're communicating about difficult topics, keep it to 1 or 2 topics at a time. Don't allow yourself to get triggered off into 48 different things because you won't solve anything then. And I know some of you out there are laughing because you do that. So I just challenge you to not do that. Watch out for the mistake of slipping around accountability. Be accountable for your side of the street. Don't be accountable for the other side of the street. Just imagine that dotted yellow line going down the road, and you've got your curb and gutter, they've got their curb and gutter and their street. You can cross over and help a little bit with each other, but you manage your side of the street. You share your feelings with I statements, and you ask them about their feelings, and they'll use I statements back and then seek to understand each other. There was session 2 for premarital counseling.